Welcome to the Virtual Center for the Study of the Constitution and Civic Responsibility, an ongoing inquiry into American political origins and evolving institutions. The Executive Director of the Virtual Center is Dr. Bill O'Brien. He's also your host for this ongoing conversation. Here he is now, Dr. Bill O'Brien.
Thank you, Bob Kincaid, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility. This is Bill O'Brien, and it is a pleasure to be with you on this Tuesday program. As we've been doing for several weeks, we are running an abbreviated program. Today we are beginning 1/2 hour than we usually begin our programs here at the Virtual Center. In the East, it's 1:30 p.m. On Tuesday, and today is the 21st day of October. As we are moving into the latter parts of October, and winter looms closer and closer here in Appalachia. A friend of mine was saying in a meeting that I just left before we came on the air, he said it seems like every 4 or 5 days the temperature drops another 5 degrees. And so I think it's kind of an indication of where we're going and what we're in for, but we're not there yet. It's a little bit overcast here today and a little bit chilly, but the temperatures are good, and we're looking at, it appears, at 4 or 5 days of rain-free weather here in Appalachia. Is going to give us a chance to rake some leaves. I think that is kind of an indication. We celebrated Bridge Day here on Saturday. In fact, I remember yesterday in conversation with Bob Kincaid that he mentioned that he was attending Bridge Day this year, and usually that's right at the peak of the colors here in the mountains, and right after that, of course, the leaves turn completely and begin to drop, and that's exactly what we're into here. It is a pleasure. It's one of the most beautiful times of the year and one of the most beautiful places on God's earth, and it is a pleasure to be with you here at the Virtual Center. If you were with us yesterday, you know that we have a new phone number, and it's going to take me some time to get used to it so that I can blurt it out here at the Virtual Center each day without checking my notes, but I'm not there yet. So as I pick up my notes, let me be careful not to tell you that I have 2 phone numbers on this sheet of paper, and one of them is a cell phone number of a good friend of mine, and I don't think you want that, although he'd love to hear from you, I'm sure. The area code is 304-663-4676. Again, 304-663-4676. 4676, of course, is Horn. So that is our phone number. We invite you to pick up the phone and give us a call in order to share your ideas and your reactions to some of the issues of this particular program or other programs and issues that we've been dealing with. We would love to hear from you. Our participants, I know, would welcome an alternative or a different voice or a second voice. And again, as we proceed with these Virtual Center programs, I think we'll be getting into the issue pretty soon of much more dialogue and much more involvement with our listeners. But it's understandable as we pick through primary source materials like the Federalist Papers and the letter of Thomas Jefferson to James Madison that we've been focusing on for the last couple of programs. It's very obvious that for most of us, and I include myself in that group, most of us are basically being exposed for the first time to the contents of these documents. And so we basically have got to become familiar with the documents, with the contents of the documents, before we can intelligently discuss them and their implications and ramifications and all the rest of it. So that's what we're about. And I basically understood that from the very beginning, that we would have a substantial portion of our programming would be information delivery as much as anything else for a substantial period of time, and that is indeed the way it has worked out. In fact, when we were first planning the program, with over the 2 hours, which is our normal broadcast day, we had really thought of the idea, considered the idea of 1 hour of exclusively presentation of information, with the idea that the second hour would be open. We would open the phones for dialogue and discussion and those kinds of things, and that's not a bad idea. But to be honest, we've been on 19 months now. We've been doing this, and we're not even beginning to scratch the surface of the available resources that we have at our disposal. So, I'm learning so much about documents and about people that I've become so fond of over the years in studying them. I must say, and this is a bit of an aside, but it happened yesterday, right at the end of our program. One of the documents that I'll be referring to in today's program, which specifically deals with the new framework of the Advanced Placement American History program from the College Board. The College Board, which obviously oversees the SAT, Scholastic Aptitude Tests for college admission. Also, one of its major programs is the Advanced Placement Program, which are advanced courses, college-level courses for the more advanced high school students in a number of different subjects. And the issue, of course, under discussion for obvious reasons would be the AP, the Advanced Placement course in United States history. And it has recently undergone a substantial change in structure and in conception. Not in format. The format of the exam itself remains pretty much the same. But the learning objectives and the skills and issues which the exams will emphasize have undergone substantial attention and substantial revision in recent years, but obviously the product of the years of study and investigation and research have come to fruition in the last few months, and a heated discussion has emerged over this. Anyway, in the course of looking at the document, looking at the College Board website, especially the Advanced Placement website, and looking at the document itself, the document under scrutiny, as it were, at the end of the document is a list of historians who participated in this reform, in these changes. And it is an incredibly impressive list of historians. Some of the most noted American historians from some of the most prestigious institutions in the world, not just in the United States, but in universities around the world as well. And as we'll see later in our program today, the fact that historians from other nations, from other parts of the world, have been involved in revisions of the AP United States History program really disturbs some people. And so some of the criticism of these changes has been leveled at the makeup of the group of historians who were involved in this. But that is kind of, that gets off the subject, my point right now. As I looked down that list, one of the names I saw on it was a historian from the University of Wisconsin in Madison named Jürgen Herbst. Herbst, and his first name, German, obviously, is Jürgen, Jurgen. And I was stopped dead in my tracks when I saw Jürgen Herbst's name on that list, because Jürgen Herbst was the professor at the University of Wisconsin that I was fortunate enough, and I want to take a moment and talk about this, that I was fortunate enough to be a graduate teaching assistant for in the late 60s and early 1970s. Jürgen Herbst was one of the finest American historians that I ever encountered in my life. He grew up in Germany in the 1920s and 30s, and of course we all know what Germany was like at the end of World War I through the 1920s and into the 1930s. And Professor Herbst was a teenager during the 1930s, during the period in the 30s when Adolf Hitler and the National Socialist Party took over in Germany and began to make the moves that ultimately led us into World War II. In the years that I was fortunate enough to work with Professor Herbst at the university, I learned quite a bit about him, and we became very, very close. I was a graduate student, obviously working on my dissertation. He was an accomplished professor with a dual appointment in the history department at the University of Wisconsin, and he was also chair of the Educational Policy Studies department at the university. Professor Herbst was instrumental at the University of Wisconsin in creating a program called the Educational Policy Studies program. And his basic goal of that program was to reform the teaching of history and to take and involve scholars in much greater detail and analysis of the objectives and the strategies currently underway, and of course this would have been in the 1960s, in the teaching of United States history and Western history generally. Professor Herbst had authored a number of books. I believe the total is 7. But he had written several books on the history of education in Europe and the German system of education. And he had also written books on American history of education in the United States. And the particular course that I was privileged to assist him in was the course on the history of American education. It was a cross-listed course at the University of Wisconsin. What that meant was that both undergraduates and graduate students were entitled to take that course. As undergraduates, it was only available as an elective for juniors and seniors who were history majors or education majors. And of course, graduate students had to have a bachelor's degree in order to take it at the graduate level. And the way the course was organized, it was offered every semester over the 3 years that I worked with Professor Herbst. And the enrollment usually averaged about 150 students per semester. And that would be a mix of graduate students and undergraduate students. And the way the course was organized, we would have 2 75-minute, hour and 15-minute lectures per week, and a discussion section would be the third meeting of the week. And as a graduate teaching assistant, I would meet with undergraduates, and there were 3 other teaching assistants who worked with me as assistants. And we would divide the undergraduate students up into groups of anywhere from 10 to 15. And we would meet with them once a week in discussion section based on the lecture course itself that Professor Herbst was delivering. And he himself, Professor Herbst, would meet with the graduate students. At that point in time, in the late 1960s, Professor Herbst was one of the members of the history department at the university that was heavily involved in a curriculum reform program in the teaching of history, which continues to be labeled the Wisconsin idea. And I was just a graduate student at the time, and I was just taken with the whole thing. And basically the whole idea behind this reform movement, entitled the Wisconsin Idea, was to shift the focus in the teaching of history from lecture and textbooks to requiring students to engage primary source materials. I didn't know anything about this movement until I was asked to be an assistant in this course with Professor Herbst. Turns out that the reason I was selected for this particular course, it turned out that the course was an experiment in the Wisconsin Idea, because I didn't even know about that. But the qualifications that I had, the reason I was selected among all the available graduate students that could have been asked to participate in this course, was because I had a background in teaching K through 12 secondary education, secondary history. My bachelor's degree was a bachelor's degree, a BS in education, with a concentration in American history. And it was that education background on my resume, on my curriculum vitae, that kind of caused the department, the history department, to flag me as a logical graduate assistant for this particular course. I didn't know any of this until Professor Herbst told me after I was already selected. And I began to participate in this course, and I can remember so much. It was one of the most incredibly enlightening academic experiences I've ever had in my life. In fact, everything that I've ever done in teaching, and I include in that list the Virtual Center itself. Everything that I've ever done in terms of teaching history from that point on has been modeled on this particular course, because I found the strategy so incredibly exciting. When we went into this course, we met with Professor Herbst before the course ever started. There were 4 teaching assistants. I was myself and 3 others. 2 of them had been assistants with him in previous semesters. 2 of us, myself and 1 other fella, were new. We met over lunch. And at that meeting, Professor Herbst basically enlightened us as to how this course was going to be organized and how it was going to be delivered. First thing that almost blew me away was that there will be no textbook in this course. In fact, students are actively discouraged from relying on a textbook. The principal reading material in this course was a collection of primary source materials on the history of American education. It was a book edited by an educational historian from the University of California named Daniel Calhoun. The book was about 550 pages of nothing but primary documents. It became my Bible for the next 3 years. And we would go into class with 150 students sitting in the lecture hall, and Professor Herbst would equip himself with a microphone and stand up before this large group. And basically we had a syllabus. He had put together a syllabus which indicated which documents, which particular documents or groups of documents would be addressed on a particular day. And Professor Herbst would walk up before that class and basically open the class by saying, "What is your pleasure?" And the whole idea was that students in a lecture hall of 150 people, students were asked to react to the documents assigned for that day. obviously the goal would be to initiate some sort of discussion and dialogue on the substance of those particular documents. I can remember, because I was just beginning my career in teaching, and I can remember how deafening the silence was when Professor Herbst would open the class by saying, "What is your pleasure?" And there would be dead silence, and everybody would look at each other saying, "He's the professor. He's supposed to talk to us." And I always admired Professor Herbst for his ability to not say anything. And
Hey,
not be...
I'm
Yes,
sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, Dr. Bill, but you've got a call on the new line.
On the new line?
Yes.
All right.
Horst is with us.
Oh, great.
Go ahead, Horst.
Horst.
Hello.
Horst, are you there?
Hi. I'm here. Can you hear me?
I sure can. How are you?
Oh, terrific. Great.
Oh, God.
It's strange on this new line. I don't know exactly what's different, but it actually sounds like talking on the telephone now. Before I was listening to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, your conversation was coming to me like I was listening to it on the radio or something, but this is actually more like a telephone quality sound. But it's okay. I hope I'm clear.
I feel the same way. It sounds to me like a telephone call, but I can hear it, and it's clear, so it's fine.
That's good enough then.
Okay. How are things in Taiwan?
Well, I had a period of time there where I was working pretty intensively on a kind of a contract basis, but that's over now. I've been able to keep up with the program in between. I just have been a little quiet. And I got a little behind for a while, but I've been keeping up with you pretty well for the last week or so. And getting one of my big kind of global ideas I've been picking at for a little while, listening to you and the various topics that came up. I guess, I don't know. Like I said, I get these really big ideas, and it's kind of hard to tie together all the little things that go with it. So I'll either say too much or not enough, or I hope I can make some sense of what I'm trying to get across here. But we'll give it a whirl anyway.
You'll do great. You'll do great.
Yeah, well, I meant to call you last week, actually. I wasn't able to do it, and then there were technical difficulties. And then, after catching up with yesterday's show, it sounds like we're probably just as well off that I didn't, because it seems like every new program you've got kind of contributes to the same idea. But starting back with, I guess maybe the discussion of Federalist number 39 and 40.
Right.
And probably 40 is when I started kind of putting things together. But, you remember, how long has it been? One of my early emails to you, I sent you one about the whole idea that empires are born with carrying the seed of their own eventual destruction, right? And
yes.
And the classic example was Adams and Jefferson discussing that how they were afraid slavery was going to be the incipient cause of disaster in the new American Republic, and very, very nearly was.
That's right.
And then I had my own idea that prior to even slavery, you had the colonies were founded on fundamentalist religion, and I thought that was kind of a different, interesting angle to look at it from. And then now recently, looking at the way the rhetorical, I guess for lack of a better term, the rhetorical battle, in supporting the cause of getting the Constitution ratified, and especially how we see it all over the place, but in 39 and 40, you're saying Madison is, especially by the time you get to number 40, Madison is really going through these enormous leaps of, logic to really, really push their case, and taking some pretty extraordinary liberties, sometimes with the whole argumentative process.
That's the way I see it, yes.
Yeah, I think you made a very good case for that. I can't argue with it at all.
Well,
it reminded me.
Yep, go ahead.
Oh, that's all right. I was just going to say it reminded me a lot of actually the whole, going back to I'm sorry, I don't want to lose anybody who hasn't been keeping up with the program for the last year or two. But even going back to the prison series when Dr. Kaminsky came in and lectured a couple of years ago, and was saying, the more he looked into it, the more he thought the whole idea of a constitution was, the necessity for it was just pretty much manufactured out of whole cloth to begin with.
Yes.
In a lot of respects, and it got me thinking. It's probably my literature background. I like a good metaphor. I can't put down this idea of like all these potential seeds of destruction that are just like kind of, being scattered and maybe taking root at the time that this whole discussion is going back, even back to the early days of the colonies, like I was saying with the religious questions. But just this episode here, when you see, well, it reminds me of something. A long time ago, you mentioned like one of the great Western, what do you want to call it, democratic traditions, I guess, that we get from the ancients, from the Greeks and the Romans, is the whole notion of like debate and rhetoric, and how the decision-making process comes down to we're going to have advocates we're going to determine a question, and we're going to cut it up into opposing sides, and each side's going to have their champion, and we're going to have this very formal, rationalized debate with all these rules in place that govern how the whole thing is going to take place, and the best argument is going to carry the day.
Yes.
And that, in a sense, I mean, if you want to boil down what the Western academic and intellectual tradition is, or the democratic tradition, pick an adjective. I'm not really sure.
It's that example. Yes.
That's one. I mean, there are several, but that's your classic debate thing. I mean, this
right.
is how we and if you stop and just look at it and look at the way that we generate our meaning and our the truths and our ideals and everything that kind of holds together our public social fabric, you couldn't go into doing any better than to say, well, this is definitely one of the underpinnings. This is one of the pillars. I don't know how many there are, but that's one.
That's wonderful.
The way that we get at our decision-making process, what is right, what do we hold, what do we value, what is the right course of action, everything always comes down to, and of course our justice system, same thing, right?
Right.
It comes down to we're gonna get the facts. We're gonna get our best reasoners, our best logic. We're gonna get our best debaters, and we're gonna let them duke it out. And whoever has the most persuasive argument at the end of the day, that's going to carry it. That's right. How we base it, and that's the fair way to go about it. And we are so serious about this.
It's faith in the idea that truth will emerge.
Right. But the funny thing about it is, I mean, in a sense, it's actually. The truth is kind of a secondary object in the exercise. The primary thing is to make your very best possible argument. And if when we train debaters, often you don't get to pick which team you're on. You say, well, this is going to be your argument. Now you go and do the best, your best job doing justice to this argument, and just try to do what you can, even if you don't personally believe in it, because it's not what you personally believe. Because that could be very misleading. Maybe you're wrong. So, but still, like, it's interesting that conviction and personal belief is actually secondary to that, into the process of analysis and argument itself. It's the argument that ultimately carries the day, no matter what the person making the argument actually thinks. And and we have elaborate, very severe penalties like built into our legal system. For instance, if you're, for instance, an attorney. And you're found to be violating this principle,
That's right. That's right.
So it's one of our venerable institutions, I would say. And so you look at what Madison is doing, and you look at what Hamilton, the whole thing with the Federalist Papers is just one example of how we have an opportunity to make our argument. And just the sheer amount of, like you documented, like what an incredible feat of argumentation and just like on the spot, really quick thinking. And, I can't remember the time frame. It's astonishing when you sit down and think about it, like over a period of like, what, 6 or 7 months?
Yeah, it's just amazing. The first one was in October of 87, and the second one, I believe the last one was I believe it was June of 88. So you're dealing with about 8 or 9 months. And within that period, 85 papers of that depth is just amazing. Just amazing.
Right. And like you say, there are indications that they aren't necessarily written in any particular in the order that they're published. For instance, number 40 deals with the whole point of like, well, is this even legal in the first place? This whole proceeding. Right. We're 40 papers into it. I think they probably thought of this long before that publication date, but who knows? Right. But it's still, it takes nothing away from the tremendous feat of intellectual rigor.
No, it's
I
just
don't even know what to
incredible.
call it.
It is
Yeah.
incredible. It is.
And so here Madison, and particularly Madison in the case of 39 and 40, is just at his peak as the champion of the selected champion who's making the case, advocating for the passage of the Constitution. As we see, he's not above taking a couple of liberties. In sporting terms, there might be a couple of fouls here. He gets really close to the line.
Yes, he sure does.
But he gets away with it. And ultimately carries the day, whether it's on the strength of this argument or the others or everything in aggregate or something else. But still, he prevails.
That's right.
And I couldn't help thinking, it's one of the things that I guess that, we come back to this idea that the founders were really into the idea of the ordered universe and natural systems and things happen, in a very balanced, harmonious, according to laws,
right.
Laws of the universe, the laws of nature, the laws of this
right.
and that. And one of the things I believe, and I don't know, I think that they had an idea of the body politic as being, like an organism, like something that could be healthy or have sicknesses or things like this, right? Or
I agree with you. They saw the entire society as a functioning organism, and that's the way that the Scottish Enlightenment people looked upon it as well.
I thought it might be. I remember a famous quote from that time. Maybe coming from Cato's letters. I don't remember now, but there's a famous analogy about how a nation may appear to be like in the bloom of health, but the rosy glow is actually the flush of fever or something like that. It's something that was quoted often at some time in that period. I can't remember the exact. But it probably rings a bell.
It doesn't at this point. It doesn't at this point, Horst.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Well, the point being, though, if following that line of logic, and something that we see today, like in our terms, like I promise this is going somewhere.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You're doing fine.
In our conception of medical ideas, there's and not just medical, but like in psychology and cultural evaluations or analysis, there are healthy expressions, there are healthy systems, and there are systems that get out of balance, that become toxic, that get unhealthy, that get diseased. For instance, a healthy immune system, when everything is functioning right, protects you from getting sick or whatever. But if your immune system is hypersensitive or off in some way, then you get terrible allergies. If something touches you, you have a really horrible rash. It's a system that's designed to keep the body healthy, but something has gone wrong with it, and now it's actually destructive. Or, a healthy body, generates millions or possibly billions of new cells every day. But when the process goes bad, you end up with cancerous and tumorous growths and things, and that can kill you. So, healthy expression, unhealthy expression. So I got to thinking, our core Western approach to debate and analysis and determining what course we're going to take, how we make our decisions, has its own healthy expression and unhealthy expression. And it's kind of not hard to figure out where I'm going with this. If you look at what Madison is doing, number 40, it's close. It's like you say, it's on the line. It's taking liberties. It's bending the rules a little bit. But on the other hand, you also kind of take into effect what's the goal. He does, and they make I guess he kind of throws his hands up at the end of it and says, it's worth it anyway. What if the whole thing is illegal? So what? We need this Constitution because the consequences of failure are too great to contemplate. So let's just get on with it and do it.
That's right. And he makes a big argument about the difference between the ends and means. Right. And when there's an inconsistency that you've got to deal with or you've got to confront, then the way to do it is look at the ends and the means and make a determination as which is the most important, and then based on your decision, you'll go forward anyway. And that's what he does. Right. And it's wonderful.
And the whole thing depends on the end being a noble pursuit.
Right.
I mean, if your end is just like, for instance, arrogating all the property to yourself, and
no,
or putting future generations at risk, as we've been discussing over the last week. that's not a worthy goal, and that is a way that a healthy system can actually be perverted into something that's unhealthy. And I got to thinking, could this be an example of that? Look at how things are decided now. What have we been talking about over the last week and just yesterday? Now we're talking about the education system. This is one of those areas where there's more to say than I even know if I can. But it seems to me like let's see if I can find it. Every time we have a major decision to make, let's see. Well, the idea that the system has gone sideways, has turned into something poisonous and toxic is I got to thinking, if you don't win, I mean, for a long time we've been approaching our debates with the best facts. Well, facts, they're not good facts and bad facts. Facts are just supposed to be facts, right? But the best logic, right, the best reason, the best intellectual. But over time, it seems that we've discovered that actually there are easier and better ways to win arguments. And
okay. So, I think I'm getting an inkling as to where this is going.
If the end result is who wins the argument, then really there are a lot of ways to get there, right?
Yeah. Yes.
The events and the evidence are one thing. But really, and I see we've kind of come from like a 180, like in the sense that the emphasis now is not on who's making the argument, it's who you're talking to, and actually manipulating your audience to the extent possible, which brings all kinds of new weapons into play. No, it's not about what the information is. It's more like how you appeal and who you're appealing to and what sort of appeal you're making. And one thing that never goes out of style in this is, as we see, it's money. I mean, everyone knows that the influence of money in our politics is horrible and toxic, and we're we're used to thinking of this. But it's what it occurred to me is that it's not really the money itself; it's how it's being used. The whole concept has got perverted. It's not. Oh boy, what am I trying to say? I guess maybe in an ends and means evaluation, the ends, of course, are no longer noble. They are what they are. They're whatever someone's short-term interest is.
And the means become the ends.
Something like that. Well, the means just become whatever they are.
Yeah. But in a sense, the idea is if you win, then ultimately whether your means have become the ends or not, there seems to be some sort of justification in the fact that you win, and the only way you can win is not to come up with the best argument, but to render the other side incapable of responding.
Well, that's also a factor. I mean, but what I'm saying, it changes the whole concept of what the best argument is. I mean, like we start out from a poison of logic, reason, and facts, but the facts themselves are subject to debate, and really what seems to have more weight is the vigor and repetition of your argument and apparent veracity. As long as you appear to be sincere, that's usually good enough for most people because they're judging from a more emotional basis now. And when I say they, I'm thinking like in terms of our elections or
and basically what I mean, the best support for what you're saying, it seems to me, is the impact that big money is having in our elections. I mean,
money in this case, it's not the money itself. It's just the resources that money gives you access to. In this case, it gives you access to the television and the airwaves and stuff like that.
And so you can make your argument more often and louder, than your opponents. And that seems to carry the day.
And you can craft your arguments carefully to figure out what words resonate more with the people you're speaking to.
Right.
One of the innovations of the Bush years, or at least I didn't really see very much of it until then, was prior to that, polling outfits were the goal of the polling was to find out what people wanted, and what happened in beginning. I don't know beginning, but got very popular 10, 12 years ago was like polling suddenly became like, well, we're going to keep the same policy. Now let's find out which word's going to get us there. Yeah. What phrase is going to do it. We're going to poll people to find out like what they'll buy and what they won't.
What they want to hear. Exactly.
Right. Yeah. And so that's
so what that does is that shifts your whole political process from an emphasis on issues to an emphasis on personalities. Because what the voter is looking for is the personality that seems most like his own or her own.
Right. How many times do we hear that George Bush was the guy you wanted to sit down and have a beer with?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
As if that's what you want in a president.
and I think what you've done, what you've indicated here is this is so far from the original idea of you get your best debaters and everybody's got access to the facts. And you have all the facts in the hands of the best debaters, and ultimately the one that wins is the one that ought to win.
Right. It's all got that pseudo-Darwinistic kind of a sheen to it,
And we've come 180 degrees from that.
Right. Everything is justified. The victory itself is what justifies the whole process.
Right. Exactly.
And you have the best argument.
And so therefore, winning becomes the end, not the legitimacy of your position. That right. becomes secondary.
Yeah,
wow.
And I guess it's in a lot of ways. It's like we've seen this kind of degeneration in our justice system going back. At least all my life. It's one of the givens that if you have access to the most expensive lawyer, your chances of prevailing in whether it's a criminal or civil proceeding are exponentially higher.
Oh yeah.
Than if you can't afford a decent counsel, or if you or, if you're working on the pro bono thing.
One of the, I don't know if you're familiar with this at all, but I happen to be a big fan of the repeats, and I watch Matlock every time I can. I love it. Andy Griffith.
Yeah, sure. I've seen a couple. I like it fine. Yeah.
And the best thing about him, what I like about it the best, and it's a bit consistent with what you're saying, is that as the defense attorney in almost every program, I think there was one that I remember where he was the prosecutor, but most often than not, he's the defense attorney. And he doesn't have to find out who did it. All he's got to do is raise enough doubt that his client didn't do it,
right,
to get the client off. And that's the end of it. That's all he has to win. So therefore, he comes up with some unbelievable strategies for instilling an element of doubt in the jury. He doesn't have to win anything. All he's got to do is basically raise enough doubt about the guilt of his own client. Now, usually the person who is guilty is revealed, but that's not his job. And when he's attacked or when he's challenged, he'll often say, I don't have to prove that this person did it. All I have to prove is that there's doubt that my client did it. And I just love that, because it opens up a whole range of options for him in order to create that doubt. And it's fabulous. And I know one of the people that's listening right now is Bob Kincaid, and Bob has a legal background, which is a bit intimidating if you get into a heated discussion with Kincaid. He's got a legal background, and every once in a while, in spite of himself, it shows. And he really can make an argument, and he's extremely articulate. And I just, I'm wondering whether, in fact, he would agree with where we've gone or not, because, I think it's fantastic. But the fact that our entire justice system is grounded in this classic tradition, if you will, from the Greeks, about the idea, and the founders. One of the things that I've been so impressed with about the founders is they buy into the idea of the marketplace of ideas. They really believe that truth emerges from an open, free marketplace. that if there's an opportunity for all the available options to be placed on the table competently, then the truth will emerge. Yeah. If everybody...
Because that's the thing, it's like... Yeah, I was just going to say, like, everything really depends. I mean, it all hangs on everyone acting to a certain degree in good faith. I mean, obviously, there were people at the time that were pursuing ulterior motives.
It's based on the assumption that everybody wants to find the truth.
Right.
And what you've pointed out is
powerful interests being represented at the time too, but still.
What you've pointed out is that in today's world, the truth has taken a back seat to winning. And
I think it happened a long time ago.
The most important thing is to win.
With the faucets, with the restrictions lifted on funding and I guess just some of the consequences of our own information-driven age. You know, a lot of these things go together, and they create this snowball effect. It's hard to pick at strands and say this started here, but it's been going for a while now. But I just stop and think about it. It's like every single urgent issue we have today is permeated so much with the money that no matter everywhere we start out at, I mean, it begins so badly compromised. It's already inadequate to whatever solution we need. If we're going to put together something in front of the EPA and pass some restrictions on carbon dioxide, we already know whatever our target is, just to keep us, out of the red zone. We're not going to make it because we have to compromise. If we can get anything, and this is back when we could actually pass legislation. In the last 4 years, that's out the window too. But I mean, like, it's just you can't ignore that power and that influence, and it doesn't matter at all the right or wrong of it. I mean, the slightest bit. Right. I mean, like we're talking about what was it, usufruct? Passing on something with a livable earth to future generations while they're living instead of consuming it all. If we all sat down and had like a 20-minute discussion on whether or not it's a good idea to blow up mountains and make the air and the water and everything so toxic that people are dying from just being in the proximity of it, there would be no debate. If you were going to have an open and honest discussion on these issues, I mean, you couldn't even find a decent lie to get around that.
Yeah.
But once you, I mean, I don't care what side you're on. If you had that to a high school debate team and said, okay, you're in charge of, you're going to argue for poisoning people and you're against it, it would be a no contest.
Right. We
can't even start out there.
In our local election here in West Virginia right now, we've got one of the feature election is for the seat in the United States Senate being given up by the retirement of Jay Rockefeller. And the Republican candidate, both of the candidates are women, and the Republican candidate is the daughter of a former governor of West Virginia who was in jail for, I can't remember how many months, 15 months, 12 months, or whatever, for all sorts of fraudulent behavior in the governor's office. And she's running, ads against her opponent, because her opponent dared to raise issues about her family. And the point is, her father was the governor here and was in jail for more than a year. I mean, how can you possibly run a campaign against anybody and not mention that?
Right.
And one of the other things, which is actually closer to your point, is that in one of her ads, she makes the point, and this is a very positive, the ad is from a very positive perspective, about one of the things that she's done as a member of Congress is make sure that West Virginia children have their health insurance. Well, the fact of the matter is she voted against the Affordable Care Act so many times,
right,
that I mean, it's a blatant contradiction in what the ad is saying. But it doesn't matter. If it's persuasive, it doesn't matter. And,
and if you actually ran an ad that was more factually based, I mean, she would probably instantly lose 20% of the electorate.
Probably, yeah. And I think that's what we're dealing with, and I think the point you make is a good one, and this issue of you mentioned the Jefferson letter that we've been addressing the last couple of programs.
Yeah.
about the earth belonging to the living, and if you create debt or any kind of if you do anything that infringes on future generations, then in reality you've shifted the balance, and the earth suddenly belongs to the dead, because you've dictated how future people will behave based on what you've done, whether it was responsible or not. And that's what we're dealing with right now is an interpretation of the past, which I believe is principally designed to support a contemporary political agenda. And if you have enough money, which means you have enough access to resources to get you in people's homes and on their television sets enough, you can continually assert your position to the point that something called the truth never even surfaces. After a while, Hitler used to say, if you say it loud enough and often enough, it becomes the truth.
Right.
And I think that's what we're dealing with.
I think maybe a corollary of that is that, and if you keep on saying it after that, truth doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't.
No, it doesn't really matter, because in fact you've lost a sense of what the truth is. And then it becomes easier to be persuasive because you actually believe that what you're saying is true.
Yeah, and in the context of modern elections, a lot of people will do what you want if you just promise to leave them alone and go away. You don't have to be
exactly.
advertising for them.
Yeah, I had a
vote for me. I'll make it stop.
a friend of mine made a comment earlier today at a meeting. I was at a Rotary meeting, and he made a comment about the fact that our polls open for early voting, that our polls are open. And he said, I don't know about you, but when I have two candidates and I'm not sure which one I'm going to vote for, I do it fast to get it over with.
Right.
And
he's probably not even really joking.
Yeah, no, and I thought it also applies if you have two candidates, neither of which you want to vote for.
Oh boy!
If you're a committed voter, you just close your eyes and vote.
Well, it seems like we have a choice between bad and really bad.
Really bad, yeah.
And that becomes... again, there's an example of the two-party system. We've gone from a system where no one gets everything they want to a system where nobody gets anything they want except for a handful of people who can drive the whole process.
Well, I used to believe that for many, many years. I mean, I really believed in the positives of our two-party system, as opposed to an issue-based system where you had all these third-party groups, interest groups, and you'd have a number of political parties emerging around particular issues, and then at the end of the day, more often than not, when the election was held, you had to find some way that the parties could come together and coalesce in order to form a governing majority.
Right.
And I always thought that was a weakness. And in America, I really believed that the fact that our two-party system seems to drive extreme positions toward the center was a good thing, because it forced people to come together and compromise and negotiate and find common ground, which is the expression that everybody uses. But the problem is that if the campaign is not based principally on issues, then the voter is faced with making the decision based on the personality of the candidate. And that becomes a marketing job. And suddenly all substance drops through the trapdoor at the bottom, and it becomes a heated debate over things that don't matter.
Yeah.
And I
think there might...
I have problems.
Well, something that occurred to me a while back. Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just thinking that another factor, and maybe secondary or maybe kind of fundamental to this, is that I think there's also kind of a Spanish prisoner effect taking place with the two-party system. In the sense that, if you follow me here, like once one side figures out that if they just stop compromising 100%, then sooner or later the other side's got to come closer to them.
Yeah.
As pressure builds for some kind of action to be taken, And this is the McConnell strategy, basically. But then again, I don't think he came up with it either. But he's really put it on steroids since he's been in charge. But once you figure that out, then you're kind of locked into it. You have to dig your heels in and completely refuse to move. And so, what is the other side left with? Well, either you pull yourself all the way over to their position, or at least far enough that some crucial business can be taken care of, or people suffer. And what are you?
Right.
Where's your snapping point? What's going to give first before we capitulate and get this over with? And look how far to the right the entire center has moved as a result of this.
That's what I was going to say. It has resulted in the center moving so far to the right that anything left of today's center is considered to be radical.
Right.
It's amazing.
Well, the amazing thing is if you poll the populace on individual issues, they're really not that anywhere near that far to the right. But that's
no.
But again, it's like our public debate is like through the looking glass on like what it's actually. Washington doesn't just exist in a bubble. Our entire government, in a sense, does. I mean, like all these things automatically get distorted, shifted over once you get them framed for political debate.
Yes,
it's bizarre.
Oh God, it really is. But I think you're right. This business of digging in your heels and refusing to compromise, because it does move the center. But I mean, the reason it moves the center is because most of the people that are in politics or who are in government believe that government needs to do something. And if one side believes that government needs to do something and the other side is determined that it's not going to do anything, then all the movement has to be from one direction toward the other.
And it's so transparent, but nobody's really watching. That's one of the other big weaknesses of the system as we have it set up.
Right. Right. One of the most interesting thing, and this is, I think, is really consistent with what you're saying, is that this issue of education, the debate in education today about the teaching of history, the right is alleging that these changes require history teachers to give students a leftist perspective.
Oh, I know. I was just reading about that today. This guy, Krieger, he's the man. Oh, God. Yeah. There's two people principally behind all the success the right has had with slowing down and opposing the Common Core standards. And this guy, the history professor of some sort. I had a quote from him somewhere. It's ridiculous. Oh, here it is. Yeah, with your permission. He says, consider for a moment from the beginning to President Obama's recent declaration of why we had to wipe out ISIS. Why do we send American boys and women into harm's way to pay any price, bear any burden? We do that because they are the defenders of liberty and freedom, in short, our core values. This is the history professor. This is his position. Mm-hmm. And he says, to scrub that out of the American narrative is a real egregious injustice. And he says, and he's making this larger point about American exceptionalism. And so he, to his point of view, his mind, and this is AP history, in order to have an advanced understanding of history, you have to buy into, or you have to defend this whitewashed, myth.
Yeah, that's right.
Of the cleaned up Republican version of American exceptionalism that doesn't allow for any mistakes or any regrettable history. They call it regrettable, but you have to put these things in context. There's a balanced way to look at our history of slavery. It wasn't all bad. I guess I don't know. I mean, if you try to take these arguments to a logical conclusion, you just can't get there because there's no logic to it.
Well, the thing that bothers me about that, and that's really where I think the next program is going to go. I think this is where the next program is going to go. But basically, what these people are saying, in effect, is that if you raise alternative interpretations or points of view to major issues, for students, if you allow students to raise alternative issues or alternative interpretations rather than just memorizing one, then you are teaching a leftist perspective, because you are basically you are suggesting to students that what we as a nation believe is right is not right to everybody, and therefore if you ask students to consider or weigh alternative interpretations, you are doing that at the expense of telling them which one is right. And so therefore, that by definition, that constitutes a leftist perspective, because it drives people into more critical interpretations, more negative interpretations of some of the issues and some of the behaviors that this nation has engaged in.
Right.
One of the positions that, for example, that I found incredible is that there were a number of professors involved in these reforms from other nations around the world besides the United States. And the criticism of that is that the only people who have a right to input on the history of this nation are citizens, are historians who are citizens of this nation. But at the same time, these are the same people that talk about America's mission and role in the world. And so what they end up doing is saying, while we make the biggest steps in the world, we have the right to deny any of the people that live where we are making steps to respond.
Yeah.
Or to, and I mean, it's a totally inconsistent argument, which is basically the idea, which is based on the idea of it's an anti-intellectualism idea, that if you raise questions about things that society wants you to believe are true, then by definition you are questioning truth, and you don't have the right to do that. You're a student.
Yeah.
And so consequently, in reality, the criticism to me is a criticism of what we've been doing in our classrooms up until this point. And the real desperation associated with this is the threat that change poses to these people, because what these changes propose to do is encourage students to think critically and to respect doubt, and to seek more evidence and more information and different points of view and all of this stuff. All the things that academically and intellectually we believe are good things.
We're supposed to believe that.
But they don't want those things in the classrooms of our young people, the majority of them. In other words, they want the right to select the students from the majority that they believe can handle this level of education. But to expose the masses to it is un-American.
Right.
I mean, that's what they say, and it just runs all over me. I mean, I get so agitated over it that I can't, But anyway, it's an unbelievable issue. You've raised some unbelievable insights. I think.
Well, what gets me about just on the level of education, because again, like I say, okay, so the money is running rampant in our politics now. I think, if you look at it, you can make a case. Like I said earlier, our justice system has been eaten up with this going way back, especially depending on who you are, because there's identity politics that's messed up in that too, of course, racial things. But even just beyond that, I mean, like when I was a kid, we had an oil company come onto our land and put in a well, and since we didn't have the mineral rights to it, they got to do whatever they wanted, and we got nothing. And they did some illegal things, but we couldn't challenge them because they had a team of lawyers, extending into the next state, in a single file line. So it was always a non-starter from the beginning, and that's just for But the same thing happens if a very wealthy person is caught, with a murder weapon or something. And in a lot of cases, you end up not going to jail. What kind of show would Matlock have been if Matlock was a public defender that had 40 other cases to manage that month?
Yeah,
it would be a very different sort of a TV program.
Yeah, I mean, it comes out occasionally in his programs that his retainer is pretty substantial.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
if you want competent representation, that's a different game.
Right.
So there's always been that, but now we see that with the lifting of financial contribution restrictions, politics are getting more and more dominated, more out in the open. People have always been cynical about our political process anyway, at least going back since I can remember. And it's funny, we still managed to come up with certain idealistic, phrases like, if I still watch, I'll see a talking head on TV say something about the deep wisdom of the American voter, and I wonder where they got that from. But okay, we still pay some lip service to some ideas, but for the most part, I see mostly cynicism out there when I talk to people about voting and political issues.
I do as well.
And we see this moving into our education system now. I mean, and you're saying it runs all over you. What just gets me all up and down is the fact that I don't know where all the optimism went, but when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, and I thought things just seemed the future was like a place where things were going to get better, because we could point to our history and we say, well, we had this, we have the civil rights era. They caught that crook Nixon, and we're making things better. The news is getting better and all this. And boy, I tell you what, we have really put the brakes on that and thrown the gears into reverse in a lot of systems.
That's right.
It's just so like we neglected education, and when we get or not, it's not neglected, deliberately sabotaged it. I guess is a better.
I think that's what we've done. Yes, I agree with you.
And now they're pointing to the results, and they're taking that as proof that we need to sabotage it even further.
Exactly. Right.
And you were saying earlier today, it's like, or yesterday, I'm sorry, I was listening to a podcast earlier today. But anyway, you're saying, one of the things that, one of the big problems with Common Core education is not the standards themselves, it's the fact that we don't have teachers that are capable of delivering that to the students, because they didn't grow up with it.
No, they never
What does that say about us?
I know.
It's like,
at the college level,
this is a reason for us to throw our hands up and give up.
Right.
So we
can't
have education.
It was kind of a joke when I was teaching full time up until a couple of years ago. That students would tell me that their friends would say, "Oh, the word in the dorms, the word is not to take your class because you make them right." And so basically, what they wanted was a short answer but multiple choice education. And so that was the word, and this was college. And the point is, we were graduating. I mean, we happened to have one of the oldest and most reputable teacher education programs in this entire part of the country. I mean, there were teachers, and so the irony is, at faculty meetings, the faculty would complain all the time that the caliber of the students we're getting is making it impossible for us to teach at the level that we're capable of teaching. And what they refuse to recognize is that 80% of the teachers who are sending them the students are our graduates.
Right.
So, I mean, we're the ones that populate the schools in the area, and then they send us students, and we complain about their level of preparation, and we never think about the contradiction that creates. I mean, if our teachers are not properly educating the kids that they're sending to us, then we better do something about the way we're preparing our teachers. But the fact of the matter is, that's a place nobody wants to go, because teacher education pays the bills. It's the biggest program in the institution. And so in this region where jobs are so scarce, getting a teaching job always meant going and getting a teaching degree from Concord and then getting into one of the regional schools. That's been the definition of success in terms of job hunting in this region for 75 to 100 years. And so if you raise questions about how well we're doing what we do in our major program, people look at you and saying, hell, we don't need to hear that, And so you can't get anywhere. It's just unbelievable.
And higher education in general is just even in the last 10 years, the degree of commercialization that or if that's the correct word, I don't know. Profitization? I don't know. It's like the whole education system, just since I graduated with my bachelor's degree, it just is almost unrecognizable now. I mean, like the student loan mills and the fact that you can't get a job as anything other than an adjunct professor anymore unless you've already got your tenure and you're making minimum wage, maybe. That's the larger context, I guess, of higher education in America. Because West Virginia has its own special thing, as you say, in the teacher training programs. But all that's happening in the background of this larger corruption. I mean, what else can you call it? The whole system is getting eaten up with again. Right. It's being turned into an industry, and again, it's in the ends means analysis. The ends are not education. The ends is someone's bottom line.
The success of the enterprise.
Right.
You know, I mean,
for example,
one of the things
sitting on the outside saying, "Look, the whole system is useless. Just come work for Google and don't even go to school. You don't need it."
Yeah, that's right. And, that's what they say. Yeah. So anyway, I agree. On this particular issue, I think we're pretty much agree. When you say sabotage education, I'm afraid, unfortunately, I'm afraid you're right. I really believe that that's what we've done. And the unspoken, the issue that nobody raises but everybody knows is there, is that it's not the standards or in the Common Core standards or the new framework of the AP programs that is at issue. It's who's getting them and what that's liable to produce in the long term. And it's going to expose people who were never even given the option to believe that there were alternative ways of looking at things. Now all of a sudden you're going to open up this to them, and there's always been the one consistency throughout the history of this country is the reluctance to ever do that. That what you had to do from the very beginning, Jefferson's argument is you got to separate the talented from the untalented. Right, and then you educate people accordingly.
Well, but according to Jefferson, though, like you do this by the time they're 8 or 10 years old, right?
So very, very young. But on the other hand, you got to teach everybody at a minimal level if you're going to communicate with them, in order to provide what we call civic education, which is make sure that they're good citizens and they do their civic duty and they vote and they work and they support their families and they obey the law and all of these things. I mean, you got to have them long enough to teach them right from wrong.
Yeah, but it's like you're saying, like again. Oh well, just in the Common Core thing. I mean, like we're shifting the teaching standards from. Well, the curriculum is either going to be information based or it's going to be critical thinking based, right? I mean,
exactly.
And as long as we're information based, and this is why we've got to get away from it, there's always going to be arguments about. Well, nowadays we have to worry about what the information actually is. Like we can't even agree on basic facts anymore. But supposing we can do that, right now their angle, if you read this Krieger guy and these other people, they want to select the facts that they're teaching to the exclusion of everything else, like you're saying. So if we keep our curriculum fact and information based, then there's always going to be an argument over which facts get included and which ones get left out. Whereas if we could just move away from the whole thing and teach students to read primary documents.
That's right.
And read and think and write and express themselves, and and why are we having such trouble getting this it should be rather obvious by now. And again, because the whole debate is not even up to us. We're just being thrown into the ring with a cardboard sword and a shield and say, here's your weapons, go and fight. Watch out for the lions.
Yesterday, I was mentioning in yesterday's program, but I think you've raised the issue again, that in class yesterday we're doing Federalist number 10, and I have the luxury, I guess it's a luxury, of a very small class. I only have 7 students.
Yeah.
And so every class we have is a discussion. I mean, it's kind of ideal because everybody uses first names. It's. There's no such thing as a podium. I mean, we just talk. But anyway, I put up Federalist number 10 on the overhead, and we were reading it, and a sentence at a time. and saying, what does this word mean and what does that word mean? What do you think he means here? And when he says most considerate and virtuous citizens, who would they be? Who do you think they are? And those kinds of questions. And you get about 4 sentences into the document, and one of the students raises his hand and said, I spent my whole life believing exactly the opposite.
Yeah.
I mean, and I said, well, all we're doing, nobody's arguing for any kind of an interpretation here. All we're doing is picking our way and reading our way through the document. And basically what he says, I never read like this. I never learned how to read like this. And the fact of the matter is we don't, and that's the issue. Mortimer Adler.
How many of the students in university that don't end up in your class ever will learn to read that like
Never.
that?
Never.
That's an uncomfortable question for us to ask too.
I mean, Mortimer Adler, in his book, How to Read a Book, makes the point that there are 4 different levels of reading, and he names the elementary level, the very first level, the basic level, is what he defines as reading for information. And basically, his suggestion is that our whole education system functions around the assumption that learning and education is information. That exposure to information is really what organized education is about. So the whole curriculum is merely the exposure of students to different pieces of information as they mature. And so consequently, in order to read for purposes of gaining access to information, you only have to read at a certain basic level. And his point is, throughout our entire nation, as K through 12 as well as higher education, rarely are students ever asked to read beyond the elementary level, because the whole education system functions around information, those who can master it and those who can't. And that's the way we separate. It's an unbelievable what he says is unbelievable when you think about it, because he's exactly right.
Well, if this is who I'm thinking of, Adler wrote these observations like decades ago, didn't he?
Yeah, he wrote that book originally in 1940.
That was back when our education system kind of halfway functioned.
He was one of the people he was one of the people that was involved in the creation of the so-called Great Book System at the University of Chicago, and which was the idea. He at the end of his book, in the appendix at the end of his book, he lists the 100 books that every person who seeks to be educated should read. And it goes all the way back to Euripides and the original sources, Euripides and Montesquieu and Rousseau and all of those people. And basically what he said is an educated person ought to read these great books. That's really what education is about. Because when you read this book, you realize that learning is so much more than just exposure to information. And then what you do is you staff your institutions with people who have a very narrow perspective on a particular source of information. They are your researchers, your experts. And so they make available to the students the wide array of information divided into categories, which becomes the curriculum. And all students do is like a Chinese menu, pick from A and B here and B and C over here and that kind of stuff, and that becomes their education, because it never gets beyond reading for information, and never does it approach reading for understanding. And if you think about it that way, and so his point is, his whole book is about, if you're reading a novel, you read in a different way. If you're reading a textbook, you read it in a different way. If you're reading poetry, you read it in a different way. If you're reading about mathematics, you read it in a different way. And his point is that that the way you read and what you read for is determined pretty much by what it is you're reading. Once you get beyond the idea that everything is news. That it's just merely education. It's just merely information. It's a fantastic approach. It's frightening, but it's very real. I got to tell you, this has been one of the best discussions I've had in a long time. I think the last time I had one this good was when you called.
Well, I probably was the last caller you had, I think.
Actually, I've had a few wonderful engagements with Bob Kincaid as well.
Oh,
so.
well, Bob, for sure. Yeah, always.
Oh, yeah, he's just incredible. But
I guess I'm running out of time here, aren't I?
yeah, well, I've only got about 8 minutes to go here, and I don't need it. But I just wanted to let you know that we're 10 minutes before the end.
No, yeah,
So,
I didn't mean to run you all
no, that's fine. It's wonderful because I'll do. You know,
no, I got to get it while I can because after next month it's daylight savings time, and then it'll be 2 in the morning. When the
oh my God,
starts here.
Yeah,
I might not be able to. I might have to take a break for the winter, so I don't know.
Well, I tell you, I have told more people. I was mentioning you yesterday. I was at a meeting yesterday afternoon, and they were asking me about the virtual center, and I mentioned the fact that they have this listener that calls in from Taiwan, and they said, "Oh my God, that's the other side of the world." And I said, "I know, it's unbelievable. I just can't even believe it." But it just so happens that not only is it a conversation on the other side of the world, it's one of the most enlightening and enriching conversations I've ever had, and I really appreciate it so much.
Oh, I love calling in when I can. It's not always easy, but it's not ever easy.
Well, what I'll invite you to do is rest up, and when you feel like you've caught up on your sleep, call us.
Yeah, I don't know if that ever happens.
Yeah, I know.
I have to get comfortable writing again, but oh well.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking, especially when you're talking about the education system yesterday. I mean, I know, just with the whole information technology explosion in the last 10 or 20 years, I'm sure there must have been hundreds of times you sit and wonder to yourself what your own education upbringing would have been like if you'd had something like if you'd had the internet available to you.
Right. Oh, yeah.
I think about this all the time.
My research for my dissertation would have been 25% faster.
Oh, I mean, just even when I was like just a kid in grade school, I mean, like one of my best friends, we had like, one of my best friends in grade school was our 1956, Encyclopedia Britannica. It was a wonderful old, it was 30 years out of date when I was, 25, when I was using it, but still it was just like, I was extremely privileged to have such a resource in our house. That was a big deal.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And now I think about kids today, and it's like one of the things that's occurred to me is that, we may be mine may be one of the last generations to grow up with the phrase "I wonder" in our vocabulary. Like, I like to start up a conversation with somebody, and I like asking questions and not knowing the answers because it leads into the kind of these speculative things, and like, it's not possible to go online anymore and say, I wonder whatever happened to this actor. What happened to this guy after this movie came out? Because you can just go and look it up and find out in 20 seconds. There's no sense in wondering about anything like that anymore.
Right. And, I agree.
And I still prefer the question, even if I can, rather than just like go and look up. But it's not really the facts I'm looking for. It's the whole unraveling, And future generations will have their own way of going about these things. But it's just like little considerations like that make you think that you're really on stepping over from like one major era in human history going into a new one. And those are just like some of the little manifestations of how these things turn up. And I think to myself, it's like we could be doing such great things with this powerful informational tool if we don't end up.
Oh my God, it's just fabulous. I mean, I've been thinking just in doing this program. I mean, I click on things as one of our listeners sent me a link to a letter, an article. And it was a review of Piketty's book on the economy.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And it was by Bill Gates. And he said, and so his email, the title of his email was Bill Gates on Piketty. And I thought, oh my God, that's fantastic. I never even thought of that. So I go on Google and I click Bill Gates on Piketty, and I get this list of sources where Bill Gates reviewed the book, and then people reviewed Bill Gates.
Right.
And I'm saying, my God, this is a whole program.
Right.
This is fabulous. So
well, that's a week's worth of programs, probably.
Oh man, I'll tell you, this is just wonderful. Hey, listen, thank you so very much.
Oh yeah, me too. Thank you, Dr. Bill, and I don't know, with your forbearance, I might try this again before before the daylight savings time.
I hope so. I hope so. I hope so.
Well, it leaves us about a week
Thank
or
you so. Thank you so very, very much. Okay, buddy.
Oh,
thank
you.
you.
Okay, well, I'll talk to you next time. You have a good day.
Bye-bye now. Thank you, sir. Thank you. We are at 55 minutes after the hour. We have about 3 minutes left in our program today. Talk about time flying. I could make a kind of an off the cuff, rather offhand comment, because usually in the middle of the program, for reasons which I won't go into, you need to take a break. Not this time. Not with him on the phone. I'll tell you, this is one of the most exciting things. It brings me back to graduate school. I used to look forward. I used to relish these discussions in graduate school. Where you'd sit around all night and basically drink beer and eat pizza and solve the world's problems. And by the time the sun came up in the morning, even if you hadn't solved them, you got far enough along that you could go and sleep on it for a while, and it was wonderful. And these conversations with Horst kind of bring those days back to me. We're at 56 minutes after the hour. Let me just use the final 2 minutes of our program today to close the point that I was talking about when Horst called, and it was about Jürgen Herbst. And the reason that I got into this at all today was that in the course, in seeing his name amongst the list of historians who participated in the reform movement that has produced the changes in the American history advanced placement program, I went online because I had pretty much assumed that Professor Herbst had probably passed by now, because it's been years since I've seen him or heard from him. And I went online, and sure enough, I did find that he passed away, but it was only in January of last year, January of 2013. And there's a memorial essay about him on the University of Wisconsin website, which I read yesterday, and that's the first verification I had that Professor Herbst had died. And I kind of stood here in front of the computer for about a minute and a half yesterday afternoon, and just in silence, just went back and paid my own personal respects to Jürgen Herbst. He's one of the finest gentlemen and one of the finest academic scholars that I've ever known in my life. And I made up my mind today that as we begin the process of looking at this latest reform movement in education, which we'll do tomorrow, the fact that he participated in it is not at all surprising. Because when I first met him in 1967, I realized that he was in the cutting edge and the forefront of all the good things that were happening at that point in education, and throughout his career, he continued to be in that same forefront. We are at 58 minutes after the hour, so let me first of all thank Horst for calling in today and foregoing a couple of hours of sleep in order that all of us could benefit from his wisdom and his insights and his enthusiasm and the excitement with which he approaches learning. I just think it's absolutely wonderful, and I want to thank him for it. And I want to thank all of you for tuning in and for your support for the Virtual Center for the Study of the U.S. Constitution and Civic Responsibility, and for your continued support of the Head On Radio Network, which makes all of this possible. For Bob Kincaid and the folks at Head On, let me thank you. Let me invite you to come back tomorrow at our regular time. We'll begin at 1 p.m. in the East. Be safe, because we sure do want you back here at the Virtual Center. Thank you.